If you're into stories where quiet choices speak louder than luxury logos, tap like, hit subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. I'm Audrey 28, founder and CEO, and yes, I still take the bus. Not because I have to, but because I like it. Because it grounds me. Because it reminds me that success should make your world larger, not your circle smaller. I grew up in a house where the staircase banister gleamed like a runway and the flowers in the entryway were refreshed before they even thought about wilting. My parents, Thomas and Eleanor Hayes, were a study in complementary power. My father, the first-generation builder who turned a small inheritance into a real estate empire through intelligence and nerve. My mother, the daughter of old Manhattan. Money, diplomacy, and taste carved into every syllable of her voice. "We will give you everything," they said without saying it, "but you must become someone on your own." My cousins heard the first part and stopped there. I heard the second part and never forgot it. So after Harvard Business School, when the obvious path zig corner office at Hayes Development, car with a key fob that looks like jewelry I zagged. I joined a struggling tech startup with 17 employees, 2 paying customers, and a burn rate you could hear crackling. My father blinked, then patted my shoulder like he was studying himself on a rocking boat. "If you're going to do it," he said, "do it all the way." My mother pressed a Chanel garment bag into my hands and murmured, "Just in case you ever need to look. Inevitable." My cousins were less subtle. "You could be driving a Porsche by spring if you worked for Uncle Thomas," Blake said, eyes glittering with the kind of certainty that counts other people's money. "Instead, you'll be making coffee for guys who sleep under their desks." I like coffee, I told him, and I like guys who sleep under their desks. The startup was the first place my brain felt truly at home. Problems arrived like weather. We built umbrellas out of code. I learned to sprint and breathe at the same time. 18 months later, I was a product manager, the kind who writes specs that make engineers nod instead of sigh. That's when I met Gerald Clean, the advisor our board brought in just as we were running out of both money and optimism. Gerald was 65, silver-haired, and chronically underimpressed by anything that sparkled. He wore one of 3 sweaters on rotation, drove a decade-old Toyota, and often ate the same sad turkey sandwich in the lobby because he preferred to think while strolling rather than perform lunch. If you looked him up, your browser would tell you he'd founded 3 unicorns, exited 2, and used the spoils to endow programs that put laptops into kids' hands without turning them into marketing photos. If you talked to him, you'd learn something else, that he was a horologist before he was a technologist, someone who once made watches by hand, one at a time, until code called louder than gears. True wealth is invisible, he told me on our first long walk, after I'd asked him a question that started with numbers and ended with people. The moment you need to show people how successful you are, you've forgotten what success means. 2 years later, when our company got swallowed, nicely, by a tech giant, I took my buyout and built what I wanted to see in the world, a platform that lets small businesses compete with giants using predictive analytics and practical tooling. No jargon, measurable outcomes. I named the company Clean Dynamics in his honor. He rolled his eyes at that and became my first investor anyway. $500,000, he said, on a handshake. He didn't want to pitch deck. He wanted a promise that I'd build something useful, keep control long enough to protect it, and use a slice of whatever came out of it to open doors for people who didn't grow up with crystal on the table. The first 2 years were a beautiful, terrible blur. I lived in a studio with radiators that banged like a drumline, rode buses at all hours with my laptop on my knees, showered between investor calls, and learned the names of every cafe in a 2-mile radius with outlets. We hired carefully. We lost customers the week before rent was due. We cried in supply closets and then laughed about crying in supply closets. On my 27th birthday, after a quarter that felt like a dare from the universe, Gerald brought takeout and a small box. He said the box had been with him through 3 companies, 2 crashes, and 1 humiliation that had turned out to be a tuition bill in disguise. Inside was a watch. Not flashy, elegant. A piece he had made himself as a younger man, one of 50 in a tiny collection that collectors whispered about like it could sprout legs and walk away if you spoke too loudly. He fastened it around my wrist and said, "Wear it when you need to remember what your worth is to you, not what the world says it should be." 3 months later, he died, suddenly, and the watch became the only heavy thing I wear. Clean Dynamics grew the way real things do, a little at a time, then all at once. We earn trust, one result at a time. Our tools helped a bodega chain reduce waste by 19% without firing anyone. A regional hospital cut our wait times by 32 minutes. A family-owned manufacturer find the one process change that saved them from a buyout. Press noticed. Investors called. I learned to say no. We opened offices in Austin and Dublin. We became the kind of company that gets whispered about in rooms we weren't invited to yet, and the kind that nonprofits call when no one else is listening. I still lived in a very normal apartment. I upgraded from a studio to 1 bedroom, bought a better kettle, and kept riding the bus. I didn't talk much about the company at family gatherings. It felt cleaner that way. My father, who reads public filings like other people read thrillers, kept tabs quietly and smiled in a way that said "I see you," even when no one else does. And then it was time for the annual Hayes family dinner. If you've never walked into a room where the wallpaper costs more than your first car and everyone speaks fluent humblebrag, imagine stepping into a museum where all the exhibits can talk. We gather at my parents' estate in Connecticut, a Georgian that thinks it might be Versailles if it tried. The driveway fills with automotive peacocks angled for visibility. This year, Blake's new Ferrari sat front and center like an altarpiece. My Uber Camry clean pulled up behind it and didn't apologize. Santos opened the door. He's been with my parents since I was 12. He's family, even if the payroll system calls him Steph. "Miss Audrey," he said, smiling the way only people who know where the good silver is kept can smile. We talked about his son Diego, now a freshman at Columbia in computer science. I'd helped with essays and FAFSA forms. First in the family, he told me, and I felt that sentence in my bones. The salon was already humming. My mother glided over in navy silk that probably had its own publicist. "The Chanel would have been perfect," she murmured, kissing both cheeks. "The blouse is silk," I offered, and she gave me a look that translated to progress. My father crossed the room and hugged me properly. "Your last quarter was something," he said near my ear. "Johnson and Williams well played." I blinked. "You saw that." He smiled. "I'm your father." Of course I did. Uncle Richard materialized with a cocktail and a voice turned one notch too loud. "Audrey, we feared you'd forgotten the successful side of the family." He rattled off an acquisition, a number with too many zeros, and ended with, "But enough about us, how's your little startup?" "Still afloat," I said, and he patted my arm like I was a well-meaning lifeguard. Blake arrived polished to a mirror shine. "Cousin Audrey," he said, eyes scanning denim like it was a riddle. Very authentic, he gestured vaguely toward the front drive. "Ferrari. 0 to 60 in under 3. "Impressive," I said, because it was, and because praise costs me nothing. Amber swooped in still glowing capri. Madison's diamond pendant caught the chandelier and tried to blind someone. Justin checked his reflection in a silver serving tray. Conversations revolved around renovations and watch references and miles flown. I listened, sipped water, and thought about the nonprofit call I had at 9 a.m. With a coalition trying to use our platform to connect people experiencing homelessness to job training. 2 universes running parallel, never intersecting, except inside my chest. We were herded into the dining room 24-place settings, china that remembers the names of presidents. I found my card between Blake and Madison. Of course! The script started exactly on cue: compliments, mergers, revenue, Riyadh. The salad course arrived. Blake tested the perimeter of my life with questions that sounded like curiosity, but came with a measuring tape. "Office rent? Headcount?" 90% of startups fail, he offered, benevolent in the way a cat is benevolent to a bird. "That you've survived this long is admirable." "Thank you," I said. It was easier than explaining compound advantage and the survival curves of companies that don't spend more time pitching than building. My father cleared his throat. "Audrey's company is doing quite well," he said, without flourish. Blake's eyebrows flicked, then smoothed. He launched into a micro-lecture about viability in this economy. I considered telling him about the term sheets in my inbox and the 20 million we'd closed last quarter, about the deal memo we'd just signed with an agency that had never used the word startup in a sentence that ended in award. Instead, I ate a scallop and let my father's mouth quirks do the talking. Gerald always said dash, I started, almost to myself. Gerald, Uncle Richard asked, grazing curiosity over my words. Gerald clean, I said, and Blake snorted. The tech guy who lived like a monk? Eccentric. He believed impact is the only scoreboard that matters, I said. Easy to say with billions, Blake countered. He still flew private. He flew commercial, I said. And lived in the same modest house for 30 years. Blake shrugged, a man unconvinced by any fact that doesn't fit his story. The salmon arrived. The room warmed with wine and self-regard. And then Blake looked at me, tilted his head, and asked the question he'd been styling all night. So, Audrey still taking the bus? Or did Uber count as a splurge? The table hushed on instinct. Eyes pivoted. My mother's smile tightened. Aunt Pamela's pity got dressed for company. I opened my mouth to say something light, something that wouldn't bruise anyone's ego, and then my father spoke. Is that what I think it is? His voice cut cleanly through Blake's performance and landed on my wrist. I looked down at the watch peeking from under my cuff. What do you think it is? I asked. May I? He said, already reaching, hands careful. He lifted my wrist, studied the face, turned it just so. The room leaned forward as one organism. This is a clean original, he said softly. One of the first collection. Handmade, he didn't say, only 50 exist. He didn't have to. Gerald gave it to me, I said. Uncle Richard blinked like a camera. The tech entrepreneur made watches? Before code, my father said, unable to look away. He was a horologist. He built these himself, one at a time. The movement in this good Lord, he exhaled. Then to the table, almost reluctantly, collectors have paid 7 figures. 2, sometimes more, given provenance. The sound the room made wasn't a sound so much as a change in air pressure. Madison dropped a fork. Aunt Pamela choked discreetly on a sip of wine. Blake's mouth opened, shaped a vowel, and failed to produce it. I slipped my arm back. I wear it every day, I said. He told me beautiful things should be used, not stored. How do you dash? Blake started, then recalibrated. You and clean were close. He mentored me, I said. Invested in clean dynamics first. Taught me how to see past shine. What does your company actually do? Uncle Richard asked, tone rewritten mid-sentence. We build a platform that uses predictive analytics to help businesses operate better, less waste, more resilience, I said. We started with small businesses. Now we serve Fortune 500s, 3 large health systems, and, as of last month, the federal government. Silence hiccuped, then resumed, fascinated. The federal government, my mother repeated, eyebrows knitting. You never said. We finalized the award last month, I said. 5-year modernization across multiple agencies. Focus on service delivery and cost reduction. How large? Blake asked, trying to sound casual and landing on breathless. 900 million over 5 years, I said, sipping water. There are rooms that teach you how loud a number can be. My father smiled, not at the number, but at me. My mother stared like she was seeing a ghost and a stranger and her child all at once. Uncle Richard forgot to be dismissive. Aunt Pamela forgot to be performative. Madison began silently typing, which is what she does when she's trying to verify her reality on a phone screen. And you still live in that tiny apartment, my mother said. More wonder than judgment. I like my neighborhood, I said. I can walk to our office. The coffee shop knows my order. And buses are efficient. Better for the planet. Gerald rode the bus every day of his life, even after. I waved a hand toward the dataset that was his fortune. So your company is successful, Blake said, as if he could force the world back into place by narrating it. Truly. We're valued at 1.8, I said. I still own the majority, Blake swallowed. Billion, he croaked. On paper, I said. Valuations are theories until you sell. I pay myself a sane salary. We fund our foundation. Foundation, my father echoed, something gentle in his voice. The clean foundation for technological equity, I said. Scholarships, equipment, internships, long-term mentorship for students from under-resourced communities. 50 in the first cohort. 10-year plan to reach 10,000 annually after we refine the model. 10,000 lives changed, my father murmured. That would have pleased Clean. It pleases me, I said. Impact is the only part that stays. Dessert arrived and no one tasted it. The room's gravity had shifted. People who had air-kissed me at the door like a charming disappointment now wanted to know about predictive models and procurement battles, and how you build culture that doesn't burn out the people who make the product you sell. I answered what I could without turning dinner into diligence. I did not gloat. The watch told me to keep my wrists steady. At the coffee course, Blake leaned in, voice lower, pride strangled by realization. Audrey, I owe you an apology. I've been dash. He searched for the word and found one uncharacteristically honest. Cruel. Condescending. I assumed no performance meant no success. Would you apologize if our valuation were 10,000 instead of nearly 2 billion? I asked, not unkindly. He sat with it longer than I expected. I don't know, he said finally. Which is its own answer. Success means different things to different people, I said. I don't judge you for your Ferrari. I'd appreciate the same courtesy for my Metro card. He nodded. That watch, he said, glancing down. He must have thought very highly of you. He thought very highly of deliberate work, I said. The watch reminds me to be deliberate. Across the table, my father watched me the way you watch a person you suddenly recognize. Not as a daughter to be guided, but as a peer you could learn from. Something settled between us, new and sturdy. After dinner, we migrated to the library, where the air smells like leather and old decisions. The conversation splintered and reformed. Uncle Richard wanted my thoughts on market cycles. Aunt Pamela introduced me to a friend who runs a foundation and, miraculously, asked about outcomes before naming rights. Justin attempted to pitch me an exclusive opportunity that looked suspiciously like a fund of funds with a marketing department. I excused myself with the grace my mother taught me and found a quiet corner with a glass of whiskey that tasted like the word oak. My father joined me. That was something, he said, sitting. I always knew you were building. I didn't realize how tall. Would it have changed anything if you had? I asked. I would have blocked some of the shrapnel, he said. But you didn't need me to. I needed you to read the filings, I said, smiling. That was enough. He looked at the watch again, reverent. I heard rumors about these. I've never actually seen one. Most are hidden in vaults or glass cases. It suits you better here, he paused. I used to think legacy was the buildings with our name on them. Your foundation, your company makes me think it might be the people who carry your work in their lives. Before I could answer, Blake approached with an expression I'd never seen on his face, humility. He asked to borrow me. My father squeezed my shoulder and stood. I should go help your mother not redecorate your life with good intentions, he said dryly, and I laughed because he had finally named the thing out loud. Blake sat. I'm sorry, he said, more formally this time. Not just for tonight. For years. Thank you, I said. Do something different with it. I will, he said. I would like to learn more. About Gerald. About measuring by impact. I'll send you a reading list, I said, and he laughed like a person who'd been seen. Then my mother slid in, cheeks a little pink with feelings she prefers to keep in safer rooms. I feel awful about everything, she said. If I'd known Dash, that's why I didn't tell you, I said gently. I wanted you to accept my choices because they were mine, not because they came with a number you respected. I only ever wanted the best for you, she said, as if intent could substitute for outcome. This is my best, I said. Work that matters. People I admire. Buses that arrive on time. One watch that tells the truth. At least let me find you a nicer apartment, she tried, and I laughed because some rituals hold the world together. I love you, Mom, I said, even when you try to upholster my values. On my way out, multiple relatives offered to give me a lift to the city, the way people do right after they learn you could buy their car company. I ordered an Uber. My father walked me to the door, hands in his pockets the way he stands when he's not in performance mode. You gave us all something to think about, he said. Myself included. If you're willing, I'd like to see your office. Meet your people. Next week, I said, We'll put you to work. As the Camry pulled away, I looked down at the watch Gerald's work, now mine to wear, and thought about objects that become compasses. In a room dedicated to the art of appearing, it reminded me to remain. 3 weeks later, my father came to Clean Dynamics. He arrived early and stayed late, asked engineers questions that made them light up, and listened to our sales lead describe the kind of procurement trench warfare you can't understand unless you've been there. On the roof at dusk, he said, "You didn't just build a product. You built a place where purpose is normal." I told him that had always been the plan. The following afternoon, I sat with the architectural plans for the Clean Foundation's first dedicated space classrooms, a maker's lab, a quiet room, a kitchen with a fridge that teenagers could raid without asking. My assistant knocked. "Your 2 o'clock is here the student you flagged." Zoe walked in, 16 and luminous with intent. Her application had mapped food deserts using city data, bus routes, and grocery inventory APIS, with an accuracy that made my data science lead whistle. "Miss Hayes," she said, awkwardly formal. "Thank you for meeting me." "Call me Audrey," I said. "And thank you for showing me something I hadn't seen." We talked for an hour. She described her family's weekly trek across 3 buses for affordable produce, the way the schedules punish people who can't afford a car. She wanted to build a tool that could predict demand and reroute mobile markets dynamically. "It's possible," I said. "It's hard. Let's do it." I offered her the first slot in our new direct mentorship track, 1 afternoon a week with our data team, a stipend, and the kind of recommendation letter you can only write when you've watched someone do real work. After she left, floating, I called my father. "We're starting a pilot mentorship," I said. "Her project is good. I'd like to help," he said. "Not just a check. Time. I know a few things about zoning, logistics, persuasion." He paused, voice softer. "Your dinner. Reset some dials for me. I'd like to build beyond my balance sheet." We set a date. He met Zoe 2 weeks later. He explained how to get a city council member to show up for a ribbon cutting without making a promise you can't keep. She explained how to stand up a map service with caching so your app doesn't die the first time a local news anchor tweets it. They both looked delighted. That weekend, I attended a cousin's birthday and noticed the air was different. There were still watches and shoes and houses in the Hamptons, but the volume was lower. Someone asked me about a board seat, and I said no because they wanted a logo, not a voice. Blake arrived late, hair slightly mussed, eyes bright. Taught my first coding class at the youth center. He said by way of hello. Turns out 12-year-olds don't care about Ferraris. They care if your loop runs. I smiled. Welcome to the future. At the end of a long day a few weeks later, I rode the subway home, watch under my sleeve, laptop sipped. Across from me, a construction worker with dust still in his hair, a nurse scrolling through a text from someone who probably thinks she's invincible, a student asleep over a book, a woman in a suit the exact shade of mine. All of us traveling together for a few stops, all of us measuring success in the currency of our own lives. In my apartment, I took the watch off and set it on the dresser. It's insured because my lawyer insisted, but it doesn't live in a safe. It lives where I can see it. Not because it's worth $2 million, although apparently it is, but because it reminds me what time is for. The watch silenced a room full of status-obsessed relatives because it carried a story they hadn't heard yet, that worth can whisper, that impact doesn't need sequins, that the most valuable things we own are not investments, but invitations to pay. Attention, to make something that matters, to measure correctly. Have you ever had an object reveal more about you than you meant it to, or flip someone's assumptions with a single, quiet fact? Drop it in the comments. I read them. If this rang true, like the video, subscribe for more stories about building real value in a world addicted to appearances, and share this with the person in your life who could use a reminder that your bank balance is not your biography. And if you see me on the bus, say hi. I'll be the one wearing jeans and an old watch that keeps better time than any clock I've ever owned.